This is This is Research Refresher from the JCSU Writing Studio. I'm Dr. Gabe Seeley Morris, and today we're going to talk about rhetorical situation. The things you need to have in mind before you start writing. Part 1. Rhetoric. Many people think of rhetoric as a negative term. We often hear it in politics as when someone says, "That's just rhetoric." But that's a misuse of the word. In academic use, rhetoric is a totally neutral term. It simply means the art and science of argument. The study of rhetoric is the study of how we use language to make things happen, whether that thing is to change minds, enact legislation, or start trouble. When we say that's just rhetoric, what we mean is that someone is abusing their power of argument, usually to mislead or manipulate. Western rhetoric, that is, the tradition prevailing in Europe and all of the European colonial areas like the US, is based primarily on the Aristotelian model, from Aristotle's teachings in the 4th century BC. A number of Aristotle's ideas have continued virtually unchanged, while others are no longer applicable. One idea that remains influential is the idea of the rhetorical triangle: ethos, logos, and pathos. Since the 20th century, the idea has usually been used to explain the techniques used to appeal to an audience, hence the term rhetorical appeal. In this system, there are 3 main ways to make your appeal to your audience. Ethos has to do with persona or character. Aristotle argued that good people made good speakers, and good speakers must consequently be good people. An ethical appeal convinces the audience to trust the speaker's authority, motivations, and honesty. Logos has to do with logic and reason. An ethical appeal makes its argument on analysis, reasoning, facts, and Logos has to do with logic and reason. A logical appeal makes its argument on analysis, reasons, facts, and references to trusted sources. Where the ethical appeal expects the audience to trust you, the logical appeal expects the audience to trust the material. Pathos has to do with emotion. A pathetic appeal moves the audience with feeling, such as fear, pride, patriotism, religion, anger, and so on. The ancients considered the pathetic appeal to be the lowest of all, but it can often be the most effective, as well as the most dangerous. A pathetic appeal that works can move people much more strongly than logic, but a bad pathetic appeal can alienate and lose an audience very quickly. As I always tell my students, people like to be manipulated, but they don't like to know they're being manipulated. No substantial argument relies purely on one of these appeals. Most complex arguments will include elements of all 3, though in an academic context, obviously, pathetic appeals are not a good idea. Academic writing puts a priority on personal authority and viable evidence. Part 2. The rhetorical situation. Making an effective argument depends on knowing your rhetorical situation. For the structure of argument, go back to the video, "What is Argument?" on the JCSU Writing Studio YouTube channel. That video deals with the basic concept of argument, but the rhetorical situation helps you determine how you approach actually making your argument. There are 5 elements to consider in putting together your rhetorical situation: purpose, audience, genre, persona, and medium. Rhetorical situation is basically the why and how of the process: what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you're doing it. Purpose. Your purpose obviously is the first factor in determining how and why you write. Even in an academic context, such as you're in, there may be many different possible purposes. You may be writing to introduce a controversial new idea, to explain an old idea in a new way, to persuade your audience to believe or do something, to analyze, criticize, or understand an idea or phenomenon, or simply to report facts or discoveries, as in a scientific paper. That first choice influences all of your subsequent choices. If you're reporting a new discovery, your audience will be slightly different from the audience who would be reading a criticism of an idea. In most cases, academic writing will do more than one of these things. Introducing a controversial new idea, for instance, may require you to also analyze or criticize an older idea. Audience. Who you are writing or speaking to determines much of how you proceed with your argument. It's important to have an audience in mind from the very beginning. For instance, if you're the president making a State of the Union address, your primary audience is Congress, because they are sitting in the room watching. But the audience also extends to everyone watching at home, who may be supporters or antagonists, and by extension, the whole American people. In a paper you write for class, the audience may just be your peers and the teacher. In an academic essay, you should think of your audience as other experts who are interested in the idea you have to present. That has an important impact on how you approach them. They're going to expect particular things in terms of form, style, tone, and so on. Choosing to think of your audience in this way has real implications for how you'll write. As I explained in What is Argument, in most cases academic writing is intended for other academics, who will hopefully benefit from it in their own research. For that reason, you can usually assume your audience is sympathetic. Even if you're introducing a potentially controversial idea, treat your audience as open to new possibilities. This has important implications for tone. Genre. Who you expect or choose your audience to be impacts what kind of genre or form you'll write in. If, like the president giving a State of the Union address, the genre is already a given, it's going to be a speech. But in other purposes and audiences will require other genres. If you already know your audience is an academic audience, the most common genre or form you'll be using is the written academic essay. See the lesson on parts of an essay for a more in-depth discussion of the academic essay. Genre has a major impact on the style and tone of the language you use. An essay generally requires a more formal tone. But in determining style and tone, genre works together with persona. Just like genre, persona determines style and tone in academic writing. When you're crafting your persona for an academic piece of writing, keep in mind the rhetorical meaning of persona, authority, and trust. You're expected to make choices as an academic writer that leads the audience to trust you and your authority to speak on the subject you choose. In other words, persona means presenting yourself as the kind of person who can authoritatively make your argument. The choice of an academic essay has an influence on the style and tone you'll take as well. It's a matter of convention that an academic essay will have a formal tone. In other words, sentences will be long and more complex. You'll use larger, more precise and technical words, and the language will be less conversational. No contractions, for instance, and no slang, unless it's for a particular rhetorical effect or appropriate to the discussion. In academic writing, these standards are starting to change. Scholars have been experimenting for years with taking more conversational approaches to academic writing, and incorporating more of their personality into their work. These choices have a rhetorical purpose. All conventions have an underlying rhetorical purpose. A formal style establishes the writer's authority, because readers expect authority to sound formal. To make the choice to use a more informal style in academic writing, as many scholars do now, is to trust the reader to recognize your authority despite the difference in style. It requires a certain confidence to write informally. As a student, you may not have that choice to make. Your instructors will very likely expect you to demonstrate your command of formal style before you can loosen up and take on a more conversational style. Remember that every element of your essay is part of your rhetorical appeal. That is, your tone and style are part of your argument. Consider if the voice you use to write fits your argument. If it doesn't, adjust. Medium. For most of the last century, it's been taken for granted that if you're writing for an academic purpose, you're going to be writing a traditional written essay. For that reason, medium hasn't really been considered in much detail until the 21st century. What changed? That's obvious. The internet and modern communication technology. It's now possible to publish a written essay in a variety of formats, from ebooks to web pages, and each has its own restraints and requirements. If you publish a written essay on a web page, for instance, it may be more important to consider using hyperlinks and images to make for a more interactive experience. On the other hand, platforms like YouTube and iTunes make it possible for you to write an essay and record it as a video slideshow, like the one you're watching, or as a podcast. You can go from a purely written medium to an audio or video medium with minimal technology. Phones, iPads, and laptops can do it all. And anyone can post their own work to immediate public viewing or listening. With the camera already installed in your laptop, you can become a YouTube personality. With the enormous opportunity that modern technology offers, what we think of as being academic writing may change entirely in only a few years. And that, once again, is going to alter how you approach making your academic argument, and require you to think seriously about your medium in laying out your rhetorical situation.